Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel, and welcome to a new series that I plan to do here. DeeDee Does History. I'm DeeDee, they, them pronouns. And what I'd like to do with this series is jump into some reactions to historical videos. It's a passion of mine. I love a lot of the content that I find on YouTube. I am going to be going through a lot of, back catalog of videos that I have seen before, and just trying to add bits and stories and things that I picked up that aren't maybe covered in the video and my perspective on those. But for right now, I'm lucky in that one of the channels I want to highlight is Extra History, done by Extra Credits, and they've got a brand new video up here on the end of the samurai. This is part 1, and this one I haven't watched yet, so I don't know how much I'm going to have to add, but I'm going to get to react to it here at the same time that I'm seeing it for the first time. So thanks for coming along with me. Without any further ado, let's get right into the video here and see what we have.
Edo Bay, July 8, 1853. 4 Western ships sail into the bay, headed for the capital of the Tokugawa shogunate. Ignoring warnings that this port is closed to foreign ships, they anchor, turned their heavy guns toward a coastal trading town, and opened fire. But they're blanks, intended, they claim, to celebrate the 4th of July. But the intention of this fleet and its leader, Commodore Matthew Perry, is not so benign. He has a letter from U.S. President Millard Fillmore requesting that Japan open its ports to trade. But Perry also sends his own letter along with the gift of a white flag. He says that if the shogunate refuses the request, it will lead to war. A war that Japan will certainly lose, and in such case, they should use the white flag to indicate surrender. The shogunate will accept Perry's terms, and in doing so, bring the era of the samurai to a bloody end.
This would be what would be known as gunboat diplomacy.
8 months after Perry's arrival, and under the threat of military action, the Japanese government caved. The resulting treaty gave the U.S. trading rights in 2 Japanese ports, an American consulate in Japan, the right for American ships to purchase coal, and ensured good treatment of shipwrecked American whalers. And in doing so, the Tokugawa shogunate abruptly ended a policy of isolation that had kept it sheltered from the outside world for 220 years.
Yeah.
That period of isolation began shortly after the shogunate's founding in the Sengoku Jidai, or Warring States period, which you can learn about in our series on them, when the Tokugawa closed itself off to minimize destabilizing factors. The first move was to avoid military campaigns abroad unless victory was absolutely assured, a policy inspired by Shogun Toyotomi Hideyoshi's disastrous invasion of Korea. And clever diplomacy between the equally insular kingdoms of China and Korea ensured that the 3 powers would stay out of each other's way. Then second, they banned and brutally repressed Christianity, which Hideyoshi believed undermined the traditional structures of Confucian loyalty, and barred Spanish and Portuguese from entry in hopes of stopping Catholic missionaries. Dutch, Chinese, and for a time, English ships were allowed to trade in a limited capacity using an offshore island, but Japan essentially sealed itself off. Few Japanese were allowed to travel outside for diplomatic missions, and those who did were not allowed back. Foreign books were banned.
Wow,
At first,
didn't know that.
This insular policy upheld the shogunate's stability. No major losses in overseas wars, no chance for the Tokugawa's rivals to make foreign allies, and no disruptive revolutionary ideas challenging the shogun's strict caste system. In fact, it created one of the most peaceful periods in Japanese history. But it also came at a cost. Without access to or knowledge about the outside world, technological development slowed to a crawl. Now, while that wasn't a problem in an era where Japan's rivals were China and Korea, the shock of Britain defeating China in the First Opium War showed that Japan was woefully unprepared to counter foreign invasion. Added to that, the shogunate's enforced caste system, where a family's rank was permanently fixed, came under strain. At the top of the pyramid were the emperor and court, whose power was only ceremonial. Then it was the military leader, the shogun, though technically ranking below the emperor, who actually ruled with his daimyo or lords, followed by the warriors of the samurai beneath. Next came the farmers and artisans, and at the very bottom was the merchants. But here was the problem. The samurai were a class defined by war. It was how they made their money, and their whole purpose was to obediently fight the shogun's enemies. And Japan had largely been at peace for 2 centuries, so you could start seeing the writing on the wall. In that time, most samurai ended up turning into bureaucrats and estate managers for their daimyo. They still kept warrior codes and trained in swordsmanship, but that was largely ceremonial. Others let go when their lords cut their militaries, took to the roads as masterless samurai called Ronin, some of which little better than bandits. And rendered unnecessary and impoverished by peace, the samurai class increasingly fell into debt. But you know who didn't? The merchants. Yeah, those lowly merchants at the bottom of the pyramid kept gaining financial power from even the limited foreign trade, essentially upending Tokugawa society. They became a new middle class, living increasingly urban and decadent lives in the cities, engaging in an entertainment and artistic culture called the floating world, which encompassed red light districts with theaters, brothels, tea houses, baths, and geishas, and new forms of art like kabuki, puppet theater, painting, live comedy, and political satire flourished within these districts. It was also a world where there was no recognition of rank. In these districts, a rich merchant got better service than a poor samurai. So even before Perry's arrival, the discontent was rife among the samurai, especially among the historical enemies of the Tokugawa in the south. So when these shogunate officials signed a treaty with Perry, it exposed the weakness. Anti-foreign daimyo rallied against the government for their shameful surrender, rather than fighting the Americans with honor. Yet as internal discontent reared its head, the shogunate was more concerned with external threats. After the signing, Perry had presented the shogunate with official gifts of rifles, Colt revolvers, a sample telegraph system, and a waist-high model locomotive, technologies that stunned the Japanese officials. If they were ever to stand up to these Western barbarians, they needed to modernize fast. The shogunate quickly entered negotiations to buy steamships, rifles, and modern cannons. Plus, they sent officials overseas to scout for new technologies. But they weren't the only ones arming up. Daimyo that opposed the treaty began purchasing weapons as well, preparing for conflict with the shogun. Discontent grew. Foreign trade crashed the currency and caused massive gold and silver outflow. Plus, 3 powerful earthquakes rocked the country within 2 years, one striking the shogun's capital of Edo, and another triggering a tsunami that hit one of the new American ports. Even the gods seemed disquieted. And in the next 5 years, even more Western treaties were foisted on Japan, with many of the negotiations overseen by Chief Minister Ieyasu. Foreigners were now exempt from Japanese law, and Christianity would be tolerated. An opposition party coalesced, centered around the slogan, "Revere the Emperor, expel the barbarians." It was a party that was particularly strong in the eastern province of Mito, and in the south among the longtime Tokugawa enemies of Satsuma and Shoshu. Increasingly, they began to talk about overthrowing the shogunate and replacing it with a government centered around the currently ceremonial emperor. Among the southern nobles were 3 men that would play a key role in events to come, becoming known as the 3 great nobles, but we'll meet them later. The emperor was, after all, still technically the head of government, and he was privately furious about the unequal treaties. For the anti-foreign and pro-imperial parties, it was an opportunity to finally do away with the Tokugawa and rally behind the emperor instead. It was a particularly convenient time for a coup, since there was also a succession crisis in the shogunate. Because you see, during the negotiations with Perry, the shogun had died, leaving the position of shogun to his sickly son, who only lived 5 years. Then when he in turn died, multiple factions tried to back their favorite candidate. One faction backed Tokugawa Yoshinobu, who would be key to later events, but Ieyasu managed to steer Tokugawa Ieyasu to the position, despite the fact that he was only 12, and the other candidates were adults. Ieyasu became regent for the young shogun, assuming most of the official powers, and he immediately used his new influence to purge court of opposing factions.
That's a classic move. Oh no, let's definitely put the child in charge, and I will just generously rule in their stead. Happened plenty of times before, and we'll see. I'm sure that this goes about as well as it usually does.
Putting Yoshinobu and his supporters under house arrest, banishing the anti-foreign party from court, and beheading their 2 most prominent leaders for plotting against the government. It was the start of what would be an increasing cycle of political violence. EDO Castle, March 24th, 1860. A festival day. Ieyasu is needed at the castle for meetings. His train of attendants, 60 guards and palanquin bearers, are all on the lookout. There have been threats. Suddenly, there's a shot from a Colt revolver. Shouts. Sunlight on blades. A group of Ronin from Mito crash into the front of the cars. The attendants drop E's palanquin and surge forward to protect their daimyo. They don't see the man coming from the side. Approaching the now unguarded sedan chair, it's a samurai from Satsuma. He drags the minister out of the chair and decapitates him right there on the road. As the guards turn stunned, they see the samurai holding their master's head aloft in triumph. One guard cuts the assassin as he tries to flee, and then mortally wounded, the assassin falls on his sword rather than be captured. There is no going back. From here, the violence will only worsen, and the streets of Kyoto will flow red with blood. We see you, Ahmed Ziad, Turk, Alicia Bramble, Casey Mustia, Dominic Valenciana, Gunnar Clovis, Kyle Murgatroyd, and O'Reels 1. Thanks so much for being legendary patrons.
That was great. I know some of this period is covered in the Last Samurai movie with Tom Cruise. Usually a Tom Cruise movie wouldn't be my first thing to recommend as a historical lesson, but it definitely does cover some of this period. I think some more the later period, as things are really starting to become obvious that they can't maintain this isolationism from the rest of the world. And like in a lot of historical contexts, when a government tries to impose a social order or a caste system kind of in defiance of the natural order of what's going on in these economies and societies, it never turns out well. And right at the start of the video, you see that they're saying we have to place the samurai at this level and merchants here, but the economic reality of how the things were working means that just was going to be untenable, that the power was just going to naturally shift along with the money and the opportunities. So I'm really interested to see how they go with this video. I learned a few things and some specifics, of course, that I didn't know before. For anyone who enjoyed that, I highly recommend. I'm going to have the original video linked. Please go to the channel and like. And if you do enjoy it, subscribe to their channel. We definitely want to support the people creating these types of things. They're showing there their patrons. They do have an amazing Patreon level where you can, of course, vote on topics and suggest topics. And so if that's something that you have a passion for and you really enjoy this, I highly recommend go and check out their channel. Have a look through some of the other videos. I will be covering some of them here as well, of course, but definitely, if we can, support these original creators, because people who are making this historical content entertaining while still being educational, like I've seen so many people who've watched these types of videos and done reactions like this who have said, geez, I wish I had this kind of thing in school because, you know, history always seemed so dry, and they maybe covered things like this but didn't actually feel like they got or retained so much of it because it just wasn't entertaining, it wasn't engaging. So I hope to highlight some channels that are making really engaging, entertaining content. Extra History, an offshoot of the Extra Credits channel, has been one of my favorites since they started, and I know I'm going to be covering videos by them again. I do have a plan for the next one in their back catalog that I want to cover. I'm doing some research on just some extra stories, because while it isn't from where I am here in Canada, it does affect it an awful lot. So I want to be covering the video series that they have on the Irish potato famine. And if you have suggestions for any other videos, historical related or otherwise, that you want to see me cover, definitely comment down below. Subscribe if you can. Everyone definitely helps my channel move along. Again, I'll say it over and over, check out the original channel. Please support them, put a like on their videos, and hopefully you come back and enjoy this content. In the details down below, I also do have a Discord server if you want to join and chat about any of the things that I cover here, or check out some of my other videos. But thank you so much for coming. I hope you enjoyed this. I really did. Everyone, just have a great day.